Welcome back to The Move, or vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that one time in the Bible where a barren woman asks for a child and God decides to give her two. We're looking at Genesis chapter 25, verses 19 to 28, hanging out with Pastor Harold, who is still fresh on that paternity leave, which is actually perfect for today's episode. You are now in a home where you had one and now have two children. I'm currently in kind of this interim state where I'm visiting some family in California, and under one house, there are 12 of us living all in the same area, including my sister and her family, who they just had, like within the last couple of weeks, their second baby. And so I think you and I are absolutely the subject matter experts to talk about children and parenting and everything, which is a fun one because that's one of the themes that shows up here. We are seeing in the past episode that Abraham has just passed along, and now we're being introduced to the story of Jacob and Esau. But the way that these two come about, the way that these two come on the scene is kind of peculiar. And I have a question based off of what the narrative is showing here. But basically, long story short, the mother is childless, feels really bad about it, and decides to ask God and prays for a child. And lo and behold, God answers her prayer. There's a little bit of details that are important about it. But long story short, there are two kids who show up, Jacob and Esau. And it got me wondering about the idea of like praying for kids, because this narrative seems to suggest that this is something that God answers. And I have had several friends in my life over the last couple of years, actually really excitingly, in the last like 2 months, I've had two friends share their stories that they've been trying to get pregnant for many, many years. And now God has kind of answered their prayer in somewhat of a miraculous way, and they're expecting. And it's a very exciting thing, but it's got me thinking about the nature of prayer and how does God answer prayers and like just the theology of all of it. I don't know. Have you thought long about the kind of the way that prayer works and how it is a mechanism for God actually doing something that maybe he wasn't planning on doing? Or how do we make sense of this story? They didn't have something, they prayed for it, God gave it to them.
Man, that's deep. That's a very I was not expecting that. I was like, strike. Wait, what?
We could just talk about how cute your kid is if you want instead.
No, here's the deal. So I think we can relate to that. My wife and I, we went through a similar situation. So Abigail was conceived quite quickly, rapidly. We just, we waited for a long time, and then we're like, we're not getting any younger, and boom,
wow,
like it was efficiently done, and
okay,
and so then we figured, okay, well, I guess we'll be as efficient for number two. No, we were not.
Not the case, huh?
Not the case. And we actually, there was a miscarriage there, which was painful. Yeah. And we had given up hope. But one of the things that I would always, that always strikes me is that my firstborn, Abigail, she would pray a lot. Dear Jesus, help mommy get pregnant, help mommy have another baby. She would always pray randomly. She would pray because we would tell her, if you want a little sister, you got to pray for it. And she would pray. She would pray, dear, and just out of the blue sometimes. We weren't even talking about it. And she would just, okay, time to pray, going to go to bed, blah, blah, blah. And she would say, dear Jesus, help mommy have another baby. Dear Jesus, I want to have a little brother. I want to have a little sister. And lo and behold, when we had given up hope, when we had said we will be a family of 3, which will be incredibly efficient in the high cost of living Pacific Northwest, right when we were about to move from Lincoln, Nebraska, the Lord said, oh, yeah, that plan of sustainability, of economic sustainability that you had, we're going to put a hiatus on that one. Because surprise. And it's been that way. So, man, that's a great question. How does God how God answers prayers? I can relate to the story of her, which is oddly enough a repetition of her mother-in-law, right? Rebekah and Sarah couldn't have children, and I'm sure that Sarah prayed. I'm sure that Sarah got picked on, because it's always like, when are you gonna get married? When are you gonna have kids? When are you gonna have the second child? You can't have just one. When are you gonna have 3? Like, it's always somebody's got to be hassling you, right? And it's annoying At a minimum, it's annoying when people hassle you about like when you're going to get married and have kids. So I'm sure that they prayed, but the text doesn't tell us that they prayed. The text just tells us, well, there was a promise, so maybe that's why they didn't pray. I don't know. But there is this repeated pattern. And spoiler alert, there is going to be a repeated pattern with her daughter-in-law, one of the daughters-in-law. So this barrenness of the Lord asking the Lord for a child. It's interesting that it comes out in the story, and that in this particular case, as you've noted, God says, I'm going to give you 2. Bam.
Right. That was something that Emily and I were kind of like hoping against hope when we found out that we were pregnant. Because in our mind, our perfect family number is 2 kids, right? Maybe 3 at the most. But like we were like, man, how cool would it be? It would be super stressful, but how cool would it be for us just to have twins right at the get-go and then be done, and have a boy and a girl, and just have that kind of, American dream, the nuclear family ready to go. But our dream wasn't answered in that way. And it seems like what we're seeing as some of the themes for this passage is that the kind of the dream of the perfect family isn't something that is immediately available. In fact, it's almost not even almost, but it's explicitly saying that there's going to be some tension in this family, that there's going to be some infighting. There's going to be some boys will be boys kind of experience going on with Jacob and Esau.
Yeah, because that's she it's interesting that the story says that she was feeling odd, and that she consulted from the Lord, and the Lord says, oh yeah, well, let me tell you what's going on, girl. Like, you got 2, and they're gonna be fighting because these are 2 nations. And this is sort of a hinge story. This genealogy is a little hinge story of how it's going to set everything else up, right? Because it speaks here of the last part of the verse where it says the older shall serve the younger, right? It's already setting up like what this dynamic is going to be, which oddly enough also points to how the idea of a firstborn in the Old Testament is not necessarily the one who exits the womb first, but is actually the one who God designates as a title. So you're going to see this theme of Jacob being the firstborn, even though he's the one that's like coming out of the womb with that hand stuck on the. Can you imagine? I can't imagine the birth.
That's bizarre.
The birth story of this poor woman. Listen, birth. Oh my God. Oh my God. Like, listen, birth is not. There's a reason why women give birth and not us. We're pansies. All right.
True.
True. They're not the weaker sex. They are incredibly resilient and strong. We have man cold. Yeah. So I can't imagine this poor woman exiting one, right? The birth pangs, one coming out, and then immediately like the other just holding on to the foot of the first, like, oh man, that's got to be painful. So yeah, it's already setting it up that there's going to be something different. And I love how the story describes the first one was born and he was hairy and red. Because I can relate to that. My Gigi, my second one, Gigi, she's so hairy. She's just covered in fuzz. It's adorable. We would not call her Esau, however, we called her Gianna. And then Isaac was not. And then how they grew up they're completely different. Like, they're vastly different. And this prediction of strife is already going to be set up also in that last passage, in that she loves, like, daddy loves Esau and mommy loves Jacob. Like,
yeah.
And that is the part that is like so strange for me to contemplate and to think about. It's like, man, that you actually have a predilection for your kids.
Yeah. Is that inevitable? Because, like, obviously you are drawn to a particular personality, and maybe you have one child that fits that thing that you're kind of drawn to more naturally, and maybe you're not as drawn to the other one. Or if this is not inevitable, is this something that we should actively work against? Like, should we be on the lookout for, oh shoot, like, I'm starting to display some favoritism between one versus the other, and I need to make sure that I'm actively working against that kind of impulse?
I think yes. Yes.
It's inevitable and we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, no, I don't know if it's inevitable. I think you have to be aware. I don't know. Like, I'm such an expert with a 6-month-old and a 6-year-old, right? Like, I got this.
Of course.
But I think that that's one of the questions that, oddly enough, my 6-year-old has been kind of asking a little these days. Is like,
Hmm.
why do you? Because it's inevitable a little bit. She's been a little bit of an only child for a while, and all of a sudden, like, there's this other human being that we have to like pay attention to a lot more. So she's asked me a
She's
couple.
not getting as much of the spotlight anymore.
No. And it's baby and it's cute, and the sounds they make when they cuddle is just so cute. You're sleep deprived, but you look into their face and their eyes and you're like, it's okay. It's just okay because it's so cute. So that's how I've been taking my paternity leave, as you can see. I'm sleep deprived, but it doesn't matter. So my oldest will ask, like, she will tell me, I feel that you love Gigi more than me. It's been a couple of times where we've had to have the conversation. And the other day we ended up doing something and she wasn't expecting, and I just showed up and she just looked and started crying. And I said, why am I here? And she said, because you love me. And I'm like, exactly. And I had to explain to her, and I think she's trying to understand this idea that I don't love you less. And I never understood it until Gianna showed up. It's not a zero-sum game, as you have pointed out in many ways. It's not a zero-sum game. It isn't that I have only a limited amount of love as a parent to give, that now I have to like divvy it up between two of my daughters, right? And I got to make sure that it's 50-50. No, both of them get 100. Like your love as a parent expands. And so you don't play this zero-sum game. And it's the beautiful, I never understood it until it happened, that I'm like, yeah, no, shoot. Like, if Abigail would die, Gianna would not make up for it. If Gianna would die, Abigail would not make up for it. I would always have now, for the rest of my life, a hole the size of my Gianna, or a hole the size of my Abigail. And it's never going to be made up, no matter how many kids you have, because you have this one kid that was there. So it's not a zero-sum game. So I don't think that it's inevitable. I think that we probably should be cautious to allow our affinity, for one, to give the unintended message, hopefully unintended message,
right,
to the other, that they're loved less just because, well, you're not into the stuff that I'm into. And maybe as a parent, you got to make the effort to be into that stuff. And even if you're not into that stuff, like, go cheer it and support it. Yeah, I hate Disney princesses, but I'll sit down and can we negotiate with Moana? I mean, nobody gets married there. Good. And it's got a beautiful gospel theme at the end.
There you go. Something that I really appreciate about the way this story paints the picture of how children fit into the picture, because on this kind of Western idea, right, of how children are, I think that my generation and maybe the generation coming after me have kind of bought into the narrative that suggests that children are a bit of a challenge, that children are a hindrance, that they stop your ideal lifestyle, right? Like, people talk about like not wanting to have kids because of the responsibility, or because, I want to be able to live my life. I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to do this. And so I think one of the narratives that a lot of people accept about children is that children are a hindrance to the thing that you want to actually do with your life. And sometimes that's legitimate. Like, Emily and I were just reflecting at the time of this recording, things are happening in Russia and Ukraine that are very still uncertain. And Emily, as this empath of a person, is just feeling the weight of hearing stories of mothers and fathers trying to scramble to take care of their kids. And in this moment, just a few hours ago, Emily is saying something to the effect of like, I don't know that I want to have another kid right now. I don't know that I can handle that. And I get that. So I want to say that there are many legitimate reasons as to why that maybe this paradigm works. But I want to also say that I think that we're accepting this paradigm all too often, and it seems to fly in the face of the biblical narrative, the way that the Bible showcases the blessing that children are, right? The Bible talks about how children are a blessing from the Lord. And one thing I love about this is that there's a mother here who's pleading and asking for God, that in her mind, these kids are not a mistake. They're not an accident. They're not inconvenient, even though there's two when she really was maybe only asking for one. Even when her boys are maybe a little bit more challenging than she might have accepted, these are still children that she's seeking after and asking from God. And, there's this saying that you and I have with a bunch of our friends that, God thought you listener,
Mm,
you individual, that you were such a great idea that
mhm,
he thought about you,
mhm,
and boom, here you are. You are not an accident. You're
mhm,
not, a mistake. You're
mhm.
not the result of whatever kind of, storyline that you might have told yourself, but you were crafted from before your mother's womb. You're crafted with intentionality from a
Yeah.
God who desired your existence, that he
Yeah.
decided to say, you know what, here you are today.
Yep. And he thought that you were such a good idea that not only he created you, but when he saw us lost, he plunged headfirst into hell just so that we would not be lost. Like
Hmm.
that's the intentionality of it. And I love what you said because it's true. I resonate with that because we waited 10 years to have kids. And
Hmm.
I will say that a lot of it was for us. And I'm not saying that those are not legitimate reasons. So hear me out, listener. I'm not. My intent, the intent of my words, is not to impact somebody as judgmental for you deciding not have kids for very legitimate reasons. For us, for me, it was more of an excuse because I
Hmm.
wasn't going to be able to sleep in, because I wasn't going to be able to do things. And you know what? Baloney. Like
True.
you can do stuff. Yeah, but it's trade-offs. It's the same thing that happens like, well, I don't want to get married because I'm going to lose my independence. Yeah, but you gain so much more. Or you
Yeah.
gain something. Like you trade and you gain. So when you have kids, like, yeah, sure, you're not going to be able to like, you know, just go out for a movie. You have to plan a little more. Sure.
Hmm.
But the trade-off is wonderful. There are things that just come with having kids that that are just beautiful, and you can understand it. And like the life that you and Emily had, yeah, it has been vastly different now with your little one, and but you wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't trade the life of my girl with my girls. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I would not want to go back to as convenient and carefree as Harold and Rosie pre Abigail were. I would not trade it for the world. Um, yeah.
I think that this is probably what being on the other side of most leaps of faith is like, right? Like,
Mm,
in order to
mhm,
take any kind of significant step of faith, it requires a level of sacrifice and it requires a level of trust, right?
yeah,
For us, it was the same thing. Our life situation isn't. We have some things that are still left to be desired, kind of on like a surface
yeah,
reading on life. I want to say
yeah,
that we believe what scripture speaks over us, that we are lacking nothing, that we've received every
mhm,
blessing. But
mhm,
when you look at the
mhm,
details of our life on paper, I guess I should say, there are some
mhm,
things that people would say, these are the kinds of things that I want to have in order before I do fill in the blank. And for us, it
yeah,
was having children.
absolutely.
And yet, what you're saying is so true in our life too, is that once we've taken that step of faith,
Mhm,
that it's the kind of thing that I have never regretted. And that's
mm,
true of having a kid. That's true of other leaps of faith that I've taken when
mhm,
it's come to accepting calls from God and other things.
mhm,
I've been teasing this in some of the episodes moving up to this point, but in the background, I'm in the middle of one of those steps of faith right now, and there's a lot of question marks, a lot of things that are unsolved. But I want to believe and I want to move forward
yeah,
in faith, knowing that this is where God's calling me, and
mhm,
I
mhm,
trust that once we're there and once we're on the other side of it, it will also be one of these things where, you know what, maybe it's tough, maybe it's more challenging, maybe
yeah,
it's not exactly what I thought
yeah.
it would be, but I'm glad that I've done it, and I can see God moving in that way.
That's
And I don't
beautiful.
know, maybe someone listening today
Yeah,
feels like they're maybe not, maybe it's having kids, maybe it's not, maybe it's something different,
mhm,
maybe it's a career change, maybe it's going to school, maybe it's quitting their job for the next thing, but
mm,
you feel like
mhm,
you're in this stage where you're asking and you're pleading and you feel like maybe there's no answers, like the woman who's been barren for so long.
yeah,
But the good news is that God does hear, God does
yeah.
answer, and maybe this is the time for a little bit of faith to take that step out and trust that God is going to provide.
I would say I 100% agree with you. And I read somewhere the other day that even God's no is still an answer. And sometimes that the
Yeah.
heartbreak that comes from a no is the necessary ground that needs to happen for you to grow into something else. And I think that there are some things that the text also, like in the context of where we are, the social context, we can't forget that having children was like like you needed to have kids. It
Right.
was the symbol. We've transitioned a little bit from that in our 21st century American society, in which the double income, no kids status is, ooh, you know, that's what you want to live, which I can see the appeal of it. And or other people say, well, there's so many children out there that you should adopt. You know, there's so many children that also true. So I think that we can't miss that there is a context in which having children was supremely important for the family, especially for the wife, because it was considered that the wife was always guilty for not having kids, which is, you know, that's
bizarre.
Totally wrong, right? But that's the world they were in. And for God to answer, once again, it's God's faithfulness, because as we've already hinted in previous episodes, it's not necessarily about the conduct and the behavior of the people. It's about the faithfulness of God working through this family with all their foibles and with all their mess ups and with all their stumbles. God is still working, because he is creating and working redemption through the promise of progeny. So that's, and you're seeing it here already set up. There's already a setup in that last verse. You're like, oh, it's gonna happen. You're gonna see it unfold, but God is still gonna be faithful.